So much for the only goal being funny, distracting you from the fact that I have no content. So what does this mean? What has this pendulum swing done? So let's talk about the old days and the green screens, right? We had terminals daisy-chained up to our mainframes. There was no processing being done whatsoever on the client. You know, you entered some data, you viewed some data. Your client was very thin, right? So what does that mean in the modern world? Well, we've got web browsers, right? But what is that going to be in the SaaS model that we're looking at? Let's say this pendulum swings all the way back to the mainframe world that we were used to. So you've got your traditional web application, right, where it's just HTML, and then you've got Ajax, you've got all that kind of stuff, which isn't taking advantage of any sort of additional technologies that are out there. But there are a lot of environments that are being built specifically for this idea of, you know, rich internet applications. You know, that's kind of, you know, another buzzword that I forgot to include on my buzzword compliance sheet. What does that mean? What does it mean to have a rich internet application? Well, it basically means that you're moving back towards that mainframe environment where you're controlling everything about the user interaction, including the environment that they're viewing it in. So there's a lot of competing technologies out there they're kind of vying for this control over what's going to be the platform that we build the client environment in, and, you know, some of the server-side components. So Adobe has Air, which is kind of an extension of Flex and Flash, whatever. So, you know, this is their answer to that problem. Microsoft is doing the Me Too and coming out with Silverlight. There's some betas out there right now. Pretty sure this is the route that we're going to end up going, just because we're a Microsoft shop. But again, it's the same kind of idea where you're packaging up the ideas behind the Ajax model and providing a platform that abstracts that away from the developer. Same thing with Google Gears, right? You know, they're providing a framework to use Ajax in this case, so that you don't have to worry about the implementation details. You know, how is IE going to handle this particular control? How am I going to display data on a million different browsers? All you care about is how am I giving data to the client and getting information back, right? So what's the trend here going to be? Well, you know, we're not in green screen territory, right? We're still running general purpose hardware, general purpose operating systems, general purpose browsers to some extent. You know, if we had actually gotten to find out, you know, what Jer and Arsenic were going to talk about, you know, it's just one more example of why a general purpose browser is failing us from a security perspective, right? Because you can't trust the application if you don't trust the technology, and we can't trust the browser right now, right? So what is the ultimate goal behind what Google is doing? You know, are they trying to replace the browser plus general purpose hardware with the browser as an OS? You know, we could be back in total Twilight Zone where we're doing the opposite of what Microsoft was doing, where they got in trouble for bundling the browser and the OS. Well, what happens now if the browser is the OS? You know, what's that going to mean for technology as we know it? So, you know, we're kind of back to what is Google going to be doing to the software as a service space? It's a good thing Arsenic isn't here, by the way. I'm sure he's rolling in his seat on the plane. So, all right, so that's the client environment, right? So looking at the mainframe environment, what is our analogy to the mainframe environment? Where's the pendulum going to swing there? Well, our first thought might be to look at our data centers and see, well, we've got the centralization of hardware, or, you know, how are people running SaaS applications now? Well, it's centralized and hosted, but how are we doing on distributing that environment? You know, do we have something that's analogous to a mainframe? And the reality is that we've got this whole network infrastructure now, which, much like the browser, much like the OS, it's general purpose. We've got all kinds of traffic on it. It's not designated specifically for, this is our application, and all it does is talk to our client. So, you know, looking at this kind of server environment, is that the answer to the mainframe? I don't think it is. I think what we're going to end up with is this idea of cloud computing is going to be our mainframe environment. This is kind of my little nod to application security and Nintendo with the Super Mario clouds here. So why do I think that this is the ultimate goal? We'll talk a little bit about what cloud computing models that are out there right now, right? So we talked about Salesforce as being, you know, when people think of SaaS, natural tendency is think of Salesforce.com. Well, what they're doing is they have this concept of app exchange. So it's not just a SaaS application, it's a platform. You know, there's hundreds and hundreds of applications written to plug in to Salesforce.com. So it's not just an application, it's an application framework, right? And what do you think about when you think about how that works? Are you uploading it to a server? Or no, you're uploading it to an infrastructure. It's a complete infrastructure that's supporting your sort of server side or your mainframe environment. Amazon, EC2. So, you know, the general thinking right now is that you shouldn't really use this as your application environment. It's sort of like a giant /temp directory at this point. So we're obviously not there yet in terms of creating a true, robust, scalable environment. But everybody is getting into the space, right? Like Microsoft is talking about grid computing already. Google has this app engine, right? So there's been a lot of talk about how that's going to work. You know, there's the Amazon stuff. I mean, it's really pretty cool, right? If you're not one of the big guys, basically what you do is you write your app. You spin up a VM or any number of VMs. Basically, you're giving them, here's my app, you run it for me, you handle my data, all that kind of stuff. It's a really cool concept. And the reason why I think it's mainframe is that their cost model is pay per cycle, right? That's exactly how it was back in the old mainframe days where you paid for the amount of CPU time you use. So, you know, with EC2, if you're one of the little guys, you know, you're not paying for a huge hardware infrastructure. You're paying per cycle. So if you have 1 million users, Amazon's going to spin up enough CPUs so that they can support your app. If you've got 2 users, they're not going to charge you for 8 million servers. They're going to spin up 1 VM, and you're going to run off of that. So it's an interesting model. It makes total sense. But when you think about what that means for an arbitrary infrastructure, you know, we're moving definitely away from this idea of every single application has a dedicated architecture, right? We're moving to a model where we kind of have the network is the computer. We have hundreds of machines out there, general purpose hardware, running a VM. You know, maybe we have a sort of macro network, you know, kind of hypervisor. You know, it's a really kind of interesting model, and we're nowhere near it, but I think that's where it's going to go, right? So obviously, with, you know, Google getting into this whole space, you know, it's really kind of amazing how much they're behind the scenes of all this. Like every time I was looking into a specific aspect of this, it's just like, oh, Google's already here. They're already doing it. So, you know, they're pretty smart people, obviously. I think it definitely means something that there's so much investment into this idea of software as a service. So what's some good stuff about the new model? Like you're thinking about that distributed architecture, the network is the computer. How do you take down a network fabric? How do you take it out? You know, you could go unplug a mainframe, right? You can't unplug the entire network, hopefully. So, you know, traditional weapons that we use to try to attack systems, if you're in this kind of general purpose network-based architecture, old school weapons are useless. So it's kind of a nice benefit, right? You know, you take out 1 or 2 nodes of EC2, it doesn't matter. You've got 6 million other nodes picking up right where you left off. You know, you've got your data center in Houston, you know, you're right in the path of a hurricane. Who cares? You know, you've got data centers around the world, you know, basically in every location that computers are running. That kind of model, you know, it's kind of intuitive, right? That's